Hi, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce you to the literary style known as American Romanticism. And this is just the introduction of part one, and there will be a part two that follows a little bit later as well. This opening quote is from The Scarlet Letter, perhaps one of the most famous books written in the style of the American Romantics by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And we see Hester Prynne with this quotation about what nature means, this idea of experiencing things individually and digging on into nature. And this is very much going to be part of the style that we'll be discussing. So by the end of this presentation, I'd like to have looked at some of the things that led up to the development of Romanticism in the New World here in the United States at that point, have a good definition of the term, and be able to identify some of the characteristics of the style. Now, some of you may remember back in freshman year when we started studying Shakespeare, we looked at some of the things that led up to the development of the literary style in England. And some of these same things are going to have an impact on the things that happen in the United States as well. So we're going to review them a little bit. First of all was the idea of what came before Romanticism, and that'll help you understand a little bit about why there was this reaction. And you were really looking at the style period before the American Romanticism started was what's known as Neoclassicism. And a lot of this came about with a very interesting discovery, and that was after finding Herculaneum and Pompeii. And this created this incredibly vivid picture of what life must have been like, because all of these houses and people were sort of frozen in time by the lava and the ashes after the volcanic eruption. And this brought about this real interest in the classics back of ancient Greece and ancient Rome that was the dominating style for quite a while. Now, during this neoclassical period, you had this complete emphasis on reason, on rationality, logic, mathematics, with this love of everything that was very controlled and restrained, very structured sorts of formats. Even if you look at the artwork or the music from the time period, there's a balance and a symmetry that's in there, and a real sense of love of the city and industry, that is what people can create and can build and can structure and control. Now, Romanticism was a complete flip of this. It was a real pushback against this idea of logic and ration. And instead, everything was not on objectivity, but on subjective emotion, and not on planned and structure, but on spontaneity. Instead of being fascinated with these ancient cultures from far away, there was this love of your own national literature and literary forms. The writing tended to be these kind of wild, poetic, foreign kinds of exotic topics. And even if you look at the artwork and the music from this time period, you have, again, this asymmetry and this particular emphasis on the love of country and on nature, on things that were natural and organic. So a lot of Romanticism was this pushback against all of this reason and control that we saw with Neoclassicism, and instead got really into the whole heart of the matter, the romance of what was happening. And when we talk about romance, I'll bring this up several times, but we are not talking about dating and hearts and flowers and chocolates and valentines. We're talking about a sensibility, not about a relationship. So about the time that the Romanticism took place, or that really caught on, what you were seeing was this Industrial Revolution. This started in England, but also carried over to the States as well. And this is the idea of the production moved from homes to factories. So instead of each individual person going out and shearing the wool off their own sheep and weaving their own cloth and sewing everything together individually, you could go to a store now and buy something, so mass production. And these factories, of course, were located mostly in the cities. So the land that used to be available to everyone in common in villages got taken over by rich owners. The people ended up moving into the cities to find the work, because that's where the factories were. The population swelled, and you ended up with these really awful living conditions. And I'm sure you've looked at a lot of this in APUSH, or will be at some point soon. So the government policies at the time weren't also really supportive of the workers and the people. You had this laissez-faire, that is, there weren't a lot of rules and regulations on businesses. The government didn't interfere with how you wanted to treat your workers, for example. So you ended up with these really terrible working conditions. The rich were getting rich off of this, the poor were suffering more. We have all of these child labor stories. Next year in British Lit, we're going to be looking at Charles Dickens and some of his pushback against the conditions in England. But you saw a lot of this going on in the United States as well. So a lot of the Romantic movement really started as social activism, this idea that you needed to change. And this change was based on this idea that individual liberty, that each person had individual worth, and that their own imagination and their dreams were just as valuable as the labor that they could do. And this idea that nature is what would be transformative, not the city, not the factory, but this idea of getting out and having a personal connection with this organic, natural sorts of world and community, and getting back in touch with your own emotional connections, really formed some of the crux of what we saw during the Romantic movement. So, some of the characteristics of Romanticism. You're going to see this rejection of this 18th century idea and emphasis on reason and structure. You're going to see an exploration of the power of dreams and the subconscious, this new vision of nature, and this emphasis on the personal and experiential. That is, each individual person was unique and valued, and that your own individual experience was valuable and might be completely different from the person next to you. So this idea that you had to discover things for yourself, and that each individual person's experience and interpretation was valid. So to summarize, a lot of the literature we're going to be looking at is going to be dealing with the imagination, with personal experience. You're going to see a lot of sensory details, a lot of people discovering truth through experiences with nature, the idea that even the most ordinary thing is actually extraordinary, that no two blades of grass are exactly alike, that you can see the world in the drop of dew on a blade of grass. We'll talk a little bit about the concept of an oversoul. That's an Emerson bit. We'll talk about him in a bit too. And this idea of the natural versus the supernatural world. So that's the end of part one, and what I hope you'll be able to bring back to class is a fairly good understanding of the basics of what Romanticism is and some of the qualities or style traits that you might see in a piece of Romantic literature. And that's it.